This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
European Union to impose sanctions on Mali in line with ECOWAS sanctions over delayed elections. Another meeting between OSCE, Russia, the U.S., and Ukraine ends without breakthrough on Ukraine crisis. And Côte d'Ivoire takes advantage of the African Cup of Nations to drive up its coronavirus vaccinations. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. And tonight I'm alongside my colleague Uche, who has our business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Richard. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Nigeria lifts a ban on Twitter's operations in the country after 7 months. And Tanzania's president defends the country's borrowing, saying it's within sustainable levels. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with us. The European Union says it will impose sanctions on Mali in line with measures already taken by the West African bloc, ECOWAS. ECOWAS agreed to a raft of measures, including the suspension of financial transactions over the interim authority's failure to hold elections in February as earlier agreed. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell says the EU's move is a response to the arrival of private military contractors from the Russian Wagner Group. France has thousands of troops fighting militant insurgency in the Sahel region, and in December, France joined 15 other countries, mostly European states operating in Mali, in condemning the possible arrival of mercenaries. The EU also imposed sanctions on Wagner and set up a new sanctions regime for Mali targeting the junta in December. French officials say consultations are underway between France and its European partners on how to respond and whom to sanction, decisions of which are likely to be made by the end of January.
Nous voulons rester engagés au Mali.
We want to remain engaged in Mali. We want to remain engaged in the Sahel. We are there, but it must not be at any cost. The risk of the situation worsening in this country is obvious, and we will closely monitor the situation and take permanent measures, because despite all the warnings we have given to the Malian authorities, we see no sign of progress on the part of these authorities. With due respect to Mali, I said that we have stopped disbursing budgetary aid, but that for the time being, we will continue with our training and advisory activities and our military missions.
La même ligne.
A raft of economic and diplomatic sanctions imposed on Mali by the regional bloc, the Economic Community of West African States, have begun to bite. Travelers have been left stranded, and people in the country are scrambling for provisions as the 15 member states in the group announced they were closing all borders with Mali after the nation's ruling military junta announced it was delaying plans to return the country to a civilian government. CGTN's Nabil Akman Rafai reports from Accra.
The West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, had already suspended Mali from the organization after the military took over the government more than a year ago. But after junta leaders rolled back on promises to hold elections to return the country to a civilian government next month, leaders of ECOWAS nations met in Ghana's capital Accra to discuss the political situation. The group said the junta's proposal to move back to civilian rule within 5 years was unacceptable, and the decision to continue to impose sanctions, including the freezing of financial assets and travel bans on the country, was made.
These additional sanctions include: first, the withdrawal of ambassadors of all ECOWAS member states in Mali. Second, closure of land and air border between ECOWAS member countries and Mali. Third, suspension of all commercial and financial transactions between ECOWAS member states and Mali.
ECOWAS has also frozen Mali's assets in the regional bloc's central and commercial banks and suspended all financial support given to the country. In response, Mali has recalled all of its ambassadors in nations across West Africa and says it is shutting its borders with those countries. It is unclear the extent ECOWAS sanctions will affect Mali's economy, but some analysts believe it could deepen poverty and insecurity in the country.
You don't expect a credible progressive elections to be held in such a state of insecurity. In fact, things are so bad to the extent that the Malian authorities even had to seek the services of Wagner, with some alleging, some French sources alleging that there are well over 400 of them active in the country, with about 200 based in the town of Segou, not far from Bamako.
Analysts want the West African leaders to negotiate with the transitional authority in Mali to decide on a new timeline to return the country to a civilian government.
I think February is too early. It's not practical. So if there's a way, and I also think, on the other hand, that 4 or 5 years is a bit too much. So if they can, on a gentleman basis, meet each other halfway, maybe a year or two, I think that could help. However, the most important bit to all of this is for the human securities to be addressed, and this cannot be done by the Malians alone or the military junta alone. They need the help of ECOWAS.
Mali's military junta says the transitional authority is open to dialogue with leaders of the regional bloc, but ECOWAS says it will only lift the sanctions after an acceptable and agreed timeline to return Mali to a civilian government is reached. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Well, news just breaking now indicate that the United Nations has called on Mali to announce an election date. We will bring you more details on this in our subsequent bulletins. In other news, Russian-led security forces have begun to withdraw from Kazakhstan. A ceremony was held Thursday to honor their service. The troops arrived after President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev appealed for help to quell a violent unrest over high fuel prices. He called it a terrorist threat with foreign influence. On Wednesday, Tokayev said the security mission was successful, and he thanked the troops for their work. The mission commander hailed the completion of the operation.
Soldiers, shoulder to shoulder in joint formation, stood up for the defense of the fraternal Kazakh people, not allowing criminal or terrorist groups to encroach on the constitutional order and integrity of Kazakhstan.
More talks on the Ukraine crisis have been held in Vienna Thursday, but still no breakthrough. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe has been trying to create a dialogue between Russia, the U.S., and its European allies. The goal is to diffuse the mounting tensions on Ukraine's border. Natalie Carney reports from Vienna.
Yes, the meetings here in Vienna concluded with no real breakthrough, as unfortunately we also saw with meetings in Geneva and in Brussels earlier on this week. The new chairman of the OSCE, the Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Withdrawal, did say that the OSCE is committed to playing a role in addressing the security challenges of Eastern Europe. He says that more open dialogue is required, and all parties need to bring to the table initiatives aimed at reaching mutual understanding and easing tensions. He personally is also very interested in reinvigorating the Helsinki principles with full conformity of international law, believing this is one of the solutions for the current tensions and standoffs in the east of Ukraine.
Any threat posed to a neighboring country in the OSCE space is extremely concerning, and not only to the country that it is being put, that this threat is exercised against, but as I stated in my presentation, it's a challenge to the whole 57 states, which are committed to the same principles that are based on the equal sovereignty, territorial integrity within the internationally recognized borders. So, OSCE is the best suited international organization to mitigate this kind of conflict, because as you rightly pointed out, the conflict seems to be increasing.
The issue is how much can the OSCE really do in bringing down the standoff that we're currently seeing, while the OSCE works to create a more open and transparent and secure environment within the sort of political and military arenas of all its 57 members. It simply cannot deliver the demands that Russia is asking for. For instance, Russia does not want the Ukraine to enter NATO. It also wants all NATO troops out of Eastern Europe, as well as U.S. nuclear missiles. They want it out of the entire continent, of Europe. All requests and demands that the OSCE cannot provide. Putin himself, the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has called NATO's expansion to Ukraine and other ex-Soviet states a red line, and is demanding binding guarantees on this particular issue. While the OSCE security monitoring mission in Ukraine can provide the fine details of what is happening on the ground, such as ceasefire violations on both sides of the conflict, they are saying that their monitoring mission is being restricted to some degree. So even there, we are not getting the full picture of what is happening on the front line in eastern Ukraine. But the information provided by the SMM certainly does allow for more frank and more open negotiations, which is thereby hoped could bring about more stability in this ongoing conflict that we are seeing. Natalie Carney for CGTN in Vienna.
Sudan's Interior Ministry says a policeman has been killed after security officers engaged protesters at a rally in Khartoum. The protesters on Thursday rallied on the streets of the capital in response to a call by resistance committees. Witnesses say there was heavy police presence to block the protesters from reaching the presidential palace. Eyewitnesses also say a protester was killed after police fired using live bullets. The rallies are part of plans to resist the ruling military regime and push for civilian rule. Nigeria has been recording hundreds of fresh COVID-19 cases daily since the fourth wave of the coronavirus hit the West African nation. Authorities have been doubling efforts to ensure adherence to safety protocols in order to curb the spread, as Kelechi Amekalam reports.
Nigeria joined the growing number of countries that recorded cases of the Omicron variant last month, and government has announced measures to curb the spread of the virus. They include open space events for gatherings of over 50 persons, 50% capacity for indoor gatherings with full compliance to safety protocols, social distancing, wearing of face masks, and compulsory provisions of sanitary care in public places. But despite the restrictions, the number of cases are still rising, and experts believe the nation would need more than the restrictions to curb the spread of the virus.
Initially, on our facility here, let's say daily we used to have like 2-3 cases, you understand? But right now, sometimes we have about 10-15 cases a day. I feel what should be looked into is making sure that research for mutation process of the virus should be developed, enhanced, and taken care of.
Health authorities say the upsurge in the number of infections is as a result of the highly transmissible Omicron variant. Meanwhile, government recently issued new regulations for visitors to the presidential villa, rapid COVID-19 tests. It's a regulation major government and non-governmental organizations are now seeking to adopt. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Côte d'Ivoire has stepped up its vaccination drive by taking advantage of the Africa Cup of Nations to spur inoculation. The Ministry of Health is greeting soccer fans watching the football games with rapid tests, masks, and COVID-19 vaccines at dedicated fan zones. CGTN's Joy Karuki Juma with the details.
It is that time of the year when football fans storm the Cup of Nations villages to follow the games. This year, thousands of fans have flocked to the villages in Abidjan, where the matches are being projected on giant screens. The Ministry of Health here has set up stands for awareness raising about COVID-19. Rapid tests and vaccines are also being offered at the mobile clinics.
It's really good. If it was up to me alone, everyone will get vaccinated because there are a lot of people here. So, if you don't get vaccinated, you can catch the disease with someone else who is sick, whereas if you are already vaccinated, it becomes a shield. So, in my opinion, it's a good deed and I invite everyone to come and get vaccinated here.
The city of Abidjan is the center of the COVID-19 outbreak in Côte d'Ivoire. Cases have surged in recent weeks due to the Omicron variant. According to an official at the Ministry of Health, 7 million doses have been administered since December 31st, 2021. The ministry is projecting to reach 14 million doses by June 2022.
We are in a time of COVID-19, and you know the Omicron variant is in full bloom. So we came with vaccines, and even to sensitize the population to wear masks and especially to respect the COVID measures. You see here at the entrance, several devices have been put in place for the populations, wearing masks, hand gel, everything that can try to keep the virus away from the population so that they have supporters here safe and sound who will go home without being able to transmit the virus to their families at home.
Measures that are hoped will help contain the spread of COVID-19 and ensure a healthy population. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
Tunisia is reimposing a night curfew and banning all gatherings for 2 weeks starting from Thursday. Government says the move is to counter the rapid spread of COVID-19. However, critics say the restriction is aimed at blocking expected protests against President Kais Saied called for by major political parties. Adnan Shwashi has the details.
Tunisia's Scientific Committee to Combat COVID-19 announced that the decision to restore curfew was necessary. Experts say the health situation is alarming. It is characterized by the rapid spread of the Omicron variant in the country.
We took these measures because they were successful during the first waves of the pandemic. When nighttime curfew is respected and all public and private meetings and events are cancelled, we can break the chain of infections. Omicron spreads rapidly. We cannot control it without applying strict preventive measures.
For over 40 years, Munir has been working as a fabric trader in downtown Tunis. He says business owners have never experienced such a catastrophic situation following the successive lockdowns and curfews in the country.
The last 3 years were extremely hard due to the lockdowns. Now this new night curfew will devastate business activity and cause irreplaceable losses. We are fed up. Who is going to pay the salaries of hundreds of thousands of people who work at night? Will the state pay the bills of restaurants, bars and hotels? This will not happen. The country is paralyzed.
Several political parties slammed the government's decision. Opposition figures accused the authorities of banning public meetings to prevent tens of thousands of protesters from rallying over the next few days. On January 14th, Tunisia marks the 11th anniversary of its popular uprising.
The government's decision to impose a curfew and ban gatherings is purely political. It is using the health crisis as a pretext to confiscate the rights of Tunisians to protest freely. This proves against the deteriorating situation of liberties since President Kais Saied announced the exceptional measures last July.
Tunisia imposed a curfew during the first wave of the pandemic in 2020 and again for much of last year, but lifted it in September 2021 as cases dropped. The COVID-19 task force announced that its decisions are based on scientific data as well as the development of the health situation. More than 25,600 coronavirus-related deaths were recorded in the country since the outbreak of the pandemic in Tunisia in March 2020. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
You're watching Africa Live. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Here's what's ahead. Coming up, more women in Zimbabwe breaking barriers to become game rangers and tour guides.
Africa is a continent of diversity. with varied climates and enchanting geography. And a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Adnan Shirishi, Tunis, Cairo,
Syria,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. We appreciate your company. Sudan's former Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok is warning that the ongoing political stalemate that gripped the country since the military takeover could become a full-blown crisis and damage its already battered economy. Hamdok resigned more than a week ago amid widespread pro-democracy protests following a military coup that derailed the country's fragile transition to civilian rule. Naba Muad'Din has more from Khartoum.
It's been over a week since Abdullah Hamdok resigned as Prime Minister, leaving Sudanese politics at a crossroads. The international community has offered to mediate between civilians and military leaders, but tensions over who should lead the country are hampering efforts to reach a political settlement.
People need to sit and talk. There's no other way for a solution. Escalation will lead the country into an undefined future.
The country is now in a crossroad, but we want a civilian government. We don't want a military rule. We have experienced it for decades.
Some analysts believe it's time the two sides made concessions.
The civilian and military leaders should adopt a new partnership, and this is also faced by the streets that against any form of power sharing between the two sides. And I do think that this partnership between the military and civilian is must.
But finding an arrangement that suits everyone will be difficult.
While some pro-democracy groups say a partnership with the military is not what they want, other activists think a political compromise should be found to prevent the country from sliding into a civil war.
Since the October military takeover of power, the country has suffered an absence of government, which many say has led to a weakened economy and fragility. The military leaders say the formation of an executive government is needed to end the weeks-long political crisis. But efforts to form such an administration could be rejected by political parties if a consensus is not achieved first. Naba Muhyiddin, CGTN, Khartoum, Sudan.
A growing number of women in Zimbabwe are breaking barriers to become tour guides and game rangers in a field that is largely dominated by men. The Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Authority is pushing for changes to end the underrepresentation and change the face of the industry. Farine Wakatuya reports.
Sarudzai Muzinde and Catherine Washaya begin another day at the Lake Chivero Game Park, where they show off the wildlife to visitors and stand guard over it.
Patrolling the wilderness at all hours of the day and night, it's obviously very hard work, but I'm sure there are things you love and enjoy about this job. What are some of the best parts of the work that you do?
One of the best that I can say I actually enjoy doing this work is that, first of all, there's something that I've always wanted. I've already admired people in the bush. I like this natural environment, the God-given, nothing added to it. And me as a woman, I enjoy being part of that, being in charge, making sure no one is taking anything from it. And try me, no one will take anything while I'm standing.
That reveals the intent with which authorities are looking after this priceless heritage. There's been a significant reduction in the numbers of wildlife lost to poachers here over the last few years. Zimbabwe's conservation effort has been so effective, it has started reintroducing some endangered species like black rhino into game parks where they had previously been completely wiped out. The National Parks and Wildlife Management Authority aims to consolidate the gains by making conservation more inclusive.
About 5 years ago, it was 90 versus 10 because most of our officers were male, and it's a male-dominated industry. But over the last 3 years, we've increased the percentage of women to about 20, and we continue to do that.
Female enrollment in training schools has increased to 40% as the authority encourages more young women to take up a job where emotions are stretched to extremes.
It's exciting to teach people who may be ignorant about our wildlife to know more. It's dangerous, especially when encountering armed poachers, because it's your life or theirs. It's also painful when an animal dies. It feels like losing a child that I was taking care of.
She hopes the losses are minimized as more women sign up for duty. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Lake Chivero, Zimbabwe.
A Chinese-Egyptian manufacturing agreement is seeing Chinese bicycles produced domestically in Egypt. 2 models are being produced by the government's manufacturing arm. The partnership is driving a government initiative to promote sports and healthy lifestyles among Egyptians. More with CGTN's Adal El Marhoui.
A partnership between Egypt and China is seeing Chinese bicycles getting assembled locally. The government's industrial arm, the Arab Organization for Industrialization, is leading the project to produce 2 bike models, a mountain bike and a hybrid city model. Egypt says it is pursuing an ambitious plan to produce a bike for every citizen, starting with a target of 1 million bicycles.
We import all the bicycle components from China and fully assemble them here in the factory's production line. That will continue until we manufacture them domestically. The bikes come with advanced features. The mountain bike, for instance, has suspensions that can be adjusted based on the nature of the terrain.
The bikes are offered at subsidized prices, at least 30% less than the local market. Only the sports ministry sells them through its website. It costs from $120 to $150 for an adult-sized bike. To encourage Egyptians to buy, the public can get a payment facility of up to 12 months with 0 interest fees.
This is one of the most important national initiatives which the Youth and Sports Ministry is leading. It provides a very important service for the youth of Egypt. The initiative is under the auspices of the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. It doesn't only provide bikes for the public, it is part of a bigger campaign to promote strong immunity and health by practicing sports.
Since he took office, Egyptian President Sisi has been promoting bicycles. On many occasions, he appeared in different Egyptian cities practicing his favorite sport. Since then, the government has been working to encourage the public to bike. Hoping to decrease traffic and promote the eco-friendly means of transportation, Cairo has been creating bike lanes and bike stops at prime locations in downtown areas. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
The news continues on Africa Live. Time now for our business segment with Uche. Uche.
Thanks, Richard. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Nigeria lifts a ban on Twitter operations in the country after 7 months. And Tanzania's president defends the country's borrowing, saying it's within sustainable levels.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Well, let's start off in Nigeria, where the government has ended the suspension of Twitter in the country. The state halted operations of the social media giant in June last year after it deleted a comment by President Muhammadu Buhari. Now, the government and Twitter have since been in negotiations over restoring the service. This was, however, based on a set of conditions, including Twitter registering its operations in Nigeria, as well as appointing a country representative and complying with tax obligations. And still in the country, Nigeria's mining minister says the world's second biggest gold miner, Barrick Gold, and top iron ore producer Rio Tinto have expressed interest in the country's largely untapped mining sector. Now, Nigeria had said it intends to auction rights to mine gold, lithium, copper and limestone later this year. Africa's most populous nation has sizable reserves of metals, including gold, zinc, lead and iron ore, but nearly all extraction is done informally with rudimentary equipment. Now, the contribution of mining to GDP stood at less than 0.1% before international companies got in. Already, Canada's Thor Explorations has built the country's first industrial gold project. Now, the company poured its first gold from its mine in southwestern Nigeria in July and is now targeting output of 85,000 ounces a year. And the debate over national debt continues in Tanzania, with President Samia Suluhu Hassan saying that loans taken were sustainable and that there was room for more borrowing going forward. Now, according to the country's central bank, Tanzania's national debt stock swelled by $5.3 billion in the year leading up to October 2021. Well, CGTN's Daniel Kijo has been following the story from Dar es Salaam.
The debate over whether to keep borrowing is perhaps the most burning question currently in Tanzanian politics. The country's $35.7 billion foreign debt is causing an alarm. President Samia Suluhu Hassan's government says it is not discouraged from seeking external funding. President Hassan said the loans are to fund strategic projects, including the construction of the standard gauge railway.
We have been borrowing since way back, and even the development we have now is due to these loans. So I don't see why these loans are being considered a big deal. It's not a big deal. Our focus is to continue developing our people.
According to the central bank, the country can borrow up to 70% of its GDP, and it had only reached 27.9% in 2020. Analysts say, with Tanzania being one of the most conservative borrowers in East Africa, there's nothing to be alarmed about.
So we are nowhere in terms of the radar of being an alarmingly highly indebted country. We're able to service the debt certainly by the amounts that we're able to generate from tax revenues and other areas. But there is you must continue to be cautious, and I think I trust that the government will be able to do that and to borrow more smartly going forward as well.
Tanzania is currently ranked 109 out of 170 highly indebted countries globally. The debate over Tanzania's borrowing was sparked by the Speaker of the National Assembly, Job Ndugai, who criticized the borrowing trend under President Samia Suluhu Hassan, saying that the country is better off relying on internal revenue sources to finance development projects. He has since resigned from his post. Experts say the government keeps focusing on concessional financing in order to ensure the projects they fund have a large impact on growth and exports.
It helps you to be transparent. It helps you to effectively utilize the borrowing to create capacity, to create capital formation in countries so that you can be much more productive, create competitive exports that gives you the surplus, that creates the revenues, that removes you off the loan wheel cycle and helps you reduce the amount to which the amount that you're borrowing at.
In the first 9 months of President Samia Suluhu Hassan's leadership, Tanzania received about $3 billion in loans. Many say this is due to President Hassan's improved relations with development partners. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Meanwhile, in Uganda, authorities have agreed to allow cargo truck crews with negative COVID-19 test results to now transit through the country. And as Leon Senyange now reports, hundreds of trucks have been stuck at the Uganda-Kenya border as truck drivers protested new COVID-19 containment measures.
These are some of the first trucks to arrive into Uganda since the decision was made. A resolution by ministers from 4 East African countries agreed that Uganda would allow truck drivers with negative COVID-19 results from member countries to transit through to their destinations. The settlement followed the 6-day strike by the drivers who protested Uganda's proposed review of the cargo and drivers tracking system. The system allowed COVID-19 testing done within a duration of 7 instead of 14 days. The protest paralyzed business at the Malaba border post, which is one of the major entry points for trucks bringing in goods from Kenya's port of Mombasa. Uganda is a transit route for imports destined for Rwanda, South Sudan, and even the Democratic Republic of Congo. At the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak, Uganda was offering free coronavirus tests to truck drivers. However, a $30 fee was later introduced to cover government costs. Now, all countries have agreed that free antigen tests will be done. All fully vaccinated drivers should have their negative results valid for 14 days. The situation will be reviewed next week. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And in Tunisia, authorities are planning to institute several measures as the government tries to reach a deal with the International Monetary Fund before the end of the first quarter of this year. Now, the measures include cutting subsidies on energy products, as well as freezing civil service wages and also hiring over the next 3 years. But as Adnan Shaushina reports, activists have warned that proposed reforms could exacerbate the country's economic and social crisis.
The Tunisian non-governmental organization iWatch published a copy of the program developed by the North African state's government ahead of crucial talks with the International Monetary Fund for a much-needed financial bailout. The NGO denounced lack of government communication on its plans with the multilateral lender.
This secret document was developed by the government without discussing its content with experts from the Labor Union and the Confederation of Industry. This plan will have negative repercussions on the Tunisian economy. Authorities know that voters will reject these reforms. These might impact the legislative elections in December 2022. That is why the painful measures will be imposed in 2023 after the elections.
iWatch revealed that the gradual lifting of subsidies on energy products will pave the way for reaching real prices by 2026. It will also increase low-voltage electricity prices for Tunisian households. Accordingly, the government will also develop a digital platform for registration and management of the targeted subsidization of commodities.
There are too many contradictions in the approach of the government. What it says to the Tunisian people is different from what it plans with the IMF in terms of structural reforms. This is unacceptable.
However, Tunisia's finance minister explained that the government is preparing a consensual program for major reforms that will stabilize and kickstart economic recovery after the pandemic fallout and years of political instability.
The government has developed a draft reform document for Tunisia. It could coincide or intersect with the reform plan made by the International Monetary Fund. We will discuss these structural reforms and agree on this document with all our partners at home before presenting it to the IMF.
The 2022 state budget provides for early retirement before the legal age of 62. The government also encourages civil servants to start their own businesses. These measures are aimed at reducing the public sector wage bill in the North African country.
Tunisian authorities said that a set of realistic and acceptable reforms may be reached with the IMF before the end of the first quarter of 2022. Civil society organizations are calling for a dialogue on the country's structural reforms before a deal is signed with the US-based lender. Abden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz, but coming up later on Global Business Africa, investors question whether Ghana can sustain its debt levels, especially if a surge in borrowing costs shuts it out of international markets. More on that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. Do not go away. A lot more news coming your way after the break. Here's what's ahead. Wildlife agencies warn of escalating illegal trade in game trophies.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Wildlife protection agencies in Uganda are warning that the illegal trade in game trophies is rising despite tough laws in place to stop it. The Uganda Wildlife Authority says the country is a key transit route used by traffickers ferrying their illegal haul to Asian countries where the trade is lucrative. Isabel Nkuria reports.
Stockpiles of ivory and pangolin scales en route to Asian countries. Wildlife officials in Uganda are seizing contraband more often now. The wildlife products are said to be coming from neighboring countries like the DRC and South Sudan.
We are arresting quite a number of them, and when we compare, we realize that there is an increase, and some of the Ugandans now are getting involved in this trade.
Uganda made over 2,000 arrests last year compared to about 1,000 in 2020. But there's worry that the traffickers are getting better at beating the system.
So the intelligence is high. So you would expect that even traders in this kind of illegalities are aware of the intelligence, and they would always plan to see when probably the intelligence is weakest. So it is difficult to say how frequent or how often, because it is a cat and mouse kind of game.
Customs officials are being weighed down by the increasing illegal wildlife trade. Scanners at all border points have been installed to detect and disrupt the wildlife trade. But with the high demand of wildlife trophies in Asian markets, traffickers are risking it even with tough laws in Uganda. Globally, environmental policy advocates are pushing for a ban on wildlife markets, saying it's a threat to wildlife conservation. Some Asian countries have already put restrictions on wildlife trade and have even extended it to poaching of rare and endangered species. In Uganda, offenders pay up to $6,000 in fines or face life in prison or even both.
There's a very high risk because traders also in illicit goods are usually knowledgeable people, but some of them are also very skilled people. Every time such busts have happened, you may find that there have been certain exchanges with security forces or even our own personnel. So they are very risky ventures. Many of these people tend to be armed or prepared to put an offensive when things go wrong.
Some of these high-value products like rhino horns, python skins and hippopotamus teeth are said to be used for their medicinal qualities. But every contraband of wildlife trophies means a destruction of wildlife attractions. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN Kampala, Uganda.
And we are not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Here's a peek at the headlines. In sports, Tunisia's call for rematch following controversial match against Mali.
Beijing, China's capital and its cultural nerve center, a modern metropolis with traditional roots. And now it becomes the first city in the world to host both Summer and Winter Olympics. After 14 years, the biggest sporting extravaganza returns to Beijing. Thousands of athletes from around the globe will compete in over 100 events at 3 zones. Cheered on by over 1.4 billion Chinese citizens and millions abroad. CGTN will bring you a ringside view of the historic event. 2022 Beijing Olympics, the games that matter, on CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.